Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida.
Old World, Florida. Dude, I'm telling you, dude. Dr. Narco Longo came on and dropped the hammer of the god.
America's mother, daughter of Atlantis. God sent the weatherland. The devil sent the Spanish. Florida is Eden, the fountain of youth, Kalia's deception. So Florida is the truth.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Dr. Narco Longo.
Florida, it is everything. There's too much truth bomb being dropped. I can't digest it all.
Old World, Florida.
Please welcome Dr. Narco Longo.
What's up, y'all? Thanks for joining us tonight from the laboratory, right? Doctors are hard at work over here. We're going to be talking about we're all going to chemistry class, I guess, a little bit. But we've got a great guest tonight, a favorite of the channel, Mario from Symbolic Studies. So thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, dude, of course. Dr. Longo and Dr. Mario tonight.
Yeah, or what are they called? I guess we're pharmacists or
Yeah, chemists.
yeah, chemists. Yeah, right.
Right.
So the elements is something I like talking about. If you're a musician, there's something to be learned here, or there's connections to be made. I think we're going to be touching on one of my favorite, like, chemistry facts, factoids, little rabbit holes about music and octaves and harmony and things like that, because it really opens up this. Who remembers being so bored out of their mind in like science or chemistry class, especially the parts about the learning the elements, and all the kind of like mundane numbers that you have to memorize. It's very, very just dry, cumbersome knowledge when you're like 14 or whatever. And it's actually some of the most interesting stuff in the world, right? I know a lot of people get interested in science when they see like cymatics experiments, right? And they start getting into physics a little bit more. They're like, whoa, you mean you can see God like coming through the gravity, the quote unquote gravity.
Right.
You can see it in the physics. Well, God makes himself known through the minerals, the elements as well, especially some of the numerology, the etymology behind the names, the usages. Everyone knows about the alchemical metals, but that's only like 7. Well, did you know that pretty much every element we know of, or at least the ones they knew about 500 years ago, had an astrological, corresponding body, house, and the symbol was all the symbols, chemical symbols are astrologically derived to this day. So you'll find Mars, Jupiter, Saturn still bearing these alchemical symbols. But blah, blah, blah. That's just a little bit what we're going to be talking about tonight. Mario's got a nice presentation planned for us here.
Yeah.
And where do you want to get things started?
I just want to say that you proposed this topic last week. And so it really wasn't something I was thinking about. I am elementally inclined, though, my way of thinking, just in general, but it's the base elements. It's the basic 4 or 5 elements, And so I do think about that all the time. So when you propose, I was like, well, this is a really good excuse for me to kind of dive into something that I haven't really decoded with, this symbolic lens that I have now. And so I found it to be really fascinating. I learned a lot, and some of the presentation today is kind of bringing you guys along with my research rabbit hole over the last week, essentially. Things that I think you would find interesting, things I found interesting, But we're going to start off here with some tarot stuff, of all things, right? So I've got that ready to go. It's the first slide there, beyond the little intro slide. So that's just, right, the basic table, which we'll be getting into, and other variations of it. And I have a lot of questions, too, about some of this stuff. Hopefully you can maybe fill in the gaps for me with things that I'm missing here. But the first thing I thought of, right, with the periodic table of elements is that the magician stands right behind his own table of elements, right? Except it's just 4 elements. So here you have the pentacle, you have the cup, you have the sword, and then you have the wand. And so these are symbolic of the 4 elements, right? And then arguably, he might be considered the 5th element. And so just thinking about this idea of a table and elements, I'm like, I had to include this, right? This makes a lot of sense for the magician. Part of the correspondence with the card is understanding these elements, having a relationship with these elements, understanding those elements as they pertain to you and how you can use them, and how having an understanding or awareness of these elements helps in life in so many different ways, right? But I think of magnetism, being able to repel or attract certain things in your life, right? And so it also, too, these 4 elements, clearly there's a correspondence with astrology and the planetary system and all that kind of stuff. But that's generally where you're going to see in front of the magician a table with these elements right there. And then, of course, in his hand, he's holding that wand as well, right? Which is interesting to me that there's essentially 2 wands here. And it's the first card of the major arcana. So it's just that vertical 1, Roman numeral 1. He's making the as above, so below stance, right? And if people want to learn more about the wand, I did a whole presentation called The Magician's Wand, where I really get into it about what is this symbolism. And to me, essentially, the as above, so below position, Baphomet, right? He's known for basically doing a similar sort of thing. Lots of people have seen many celebrities and whatever doing this over, the ages and stuff. But I think really what it comes down to is he is kind of mirroring the world axis, and the world axis has a concept related to it that essentially is that it both separates and connects the above and the below, right? And so he is kind of this thing. He is what's separating the heavens from earth, but he is also what's connecting heaven and earth together as well. And so that's part of the symbolism whenever I see this card that I think about. And I think that the wand is emblematic of that, the same way the world tree is, right? And wands are generally, at least in this tradition, right, they're made out of wood, right? And it corresponds with fire. If you go to the next slide, you'll just see kind of a zoomed in sort of portion of that table in case it wasn't clear enough. So to me, it's interesting too. Oh, you're muted.
All good. I'm just following along.
Oh, okay. Right on. So to me, table of elements, that was the first thing I thought of. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is the Crowley version of the Magician card. Very different sort of setup. The reason why I really like this one, though, is because he really emphasizes the world axis. To me, that is exactly what's going on right behind him. And the elements are floating, right? So he's in complete control of the elements, I would say. Which is also very interesting, too, because as I started diving into the periodic table here, obviously, I mean, to me, it just made sense to spend as much time as I could with hydrogen and helium, right? And these are very light elements. And
Right.
so I think that's kind of an interesting sort of thing going on here, the fact that they're floating. And to me, what it looks like, it actually looks like he's going up the world axis, which I think is a very mercurial thing to do. I think this is the bridge Mercury has used to get from, this domain to the next one. That's my opinion. But a lot of cultures have their own opinion regarding these 4 basic elements or 5 basic elements. You'll see in the next slide just a simple pentacle, and you'll see air, earth, fire, water, and then of course spirit. Spirit generally being up top, and sometimes it's a spiral or something else. And this isn't universal, right? So the next slide, I have the Chinese version, where it doesn't necessarily have the exact same thing going on, but it has wood, right? And then it has metal, which I think is really interesting too, kind of knowing how important the metals are in the periodic table, that they would kind of have that in there. But it also includes earth too. So I just wanted to kind of show the esoteric or magical sort of systems as it relates to the elements. And I think it's just really interesting that, I spent a lot of time thinking about the 4 or 5 elements. And here in the periodic table, there's 118, right? Which wasn't always the case. Obviously, there's still room for more elements to be added. I thought it was really interesting to learn how many elements were man-made and synthetic, essentially, as well, filling in those gaps mathematically and everything else. But I wanted to take kind of I just wanted to review these basic elements first before we really dive into the periodic table itself.
For sure, man. Starting off with a zinger, I love that table of elements with the table elements on top. Crowley's, do you think maybe Crowley was saying he didn't approve of the table model by putting his elements up in the air?
That's a great question. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I feel like it is alluding to, the table itself. It's very much symbolic of Earth, right? Generally, a table is going to have 4 legs. I think of the 4 corners of Earth. A lot of foundation symbolism relates to the number 4. Right. I think you've made the case, which I think is really interesting, that Venus relates to 4. That's your understanding?
I think there's a lot more to it than that. But if we're going through the 1 through 7 sequence and giving them each to a number, giving them each to a planet, for me, the rock and roll and the 4 beat system, and just the many things that connect 4 to the earth, just like man being 5, Mars being 5, Venus would be underneath that at 4. It just makes sense to me. No,
it does make sense to me too. And I even think too, there's definitely there's some really interesting artwork that depicts a cow, right? And it basically, the cow is like the firmament. The cow is like Nut or Nuit. Right. And the 4 legs, I think of that exact same correspondence. And then with the cow, I think of course, Taurus, which is ruled by Venus too. But I think of those 4 legs of the cow. Sometimes they have like whole little scenes underneath the cow. It's like humanity underneath the cow, right? The second mother of mankind. And I think about those 4 legs and how it just kind of corresponds to everything that we're talking about. But now that I'm thinking about it, the whole thing with the table, and instead of the elemental items being on the table and having them be floating, to me, it implies a mastery of the elements, and that they're actually like in use in a way versus just sitting there kind of stationary. So that's kind of what I take away from it.
Sure.
So there you go, right? So wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. I think that's interesting. Having metal there and then wood there makes a lot of sense. I haven't spent too much time, kind of decoding things this way, but I tend to be more of a syncretist with everything, and I tend to just appreciate, other traditions and see, what makes sense and take what I think is valuable and leave the rest behind. So just thought I would include that there's a difference here depending on the tradition of what the 5 elements are. And one of the things that people, I feel like I've read this once. I can't recall exactly what book I read it in. It may have been Crowley himself that mentioned this, but there's actually a depiction in the Thoth deck of the periodic table of elements. And so this is the universe card, the 21st card in the major arcana, right? It's the final card before you come back around to the Fool. And so you see the tetramorph figures in the corners, right? There's lots of interesting symbolism here, but we'll focus on one thing. So being the final card and being the universe, I think it's incredibly appropriate that he would include this elemental structure. So there it is at the bottom in between the bull and the lion. And if you go to the next card, the next slide, you'll see a zoomed in sort of portion of that. So that is what he's showing. He's showing the periodic table of elements as he understood it in his day. And what you would see up top actually is hydrogen, helium, and then it cascading down. And I think this is brilliant. I wasn't aware that some people created the elements this way, or that this was the way it was presented. But he squeezed it in here. And if you progress to the next slide, you'll just see what I'm talking about. There it is right there. So he included this structure in the universe card. And again, there's a figure that corresponds with the fixed signs of astrology. Each one has a relationship with a different element. And I think he understood too, and I don't know, I'm not like I've studied a lot of Crowley, but I think in some ways he's a construct. I think in a lot of other ways, he was kind of like an agent of sorts as well. I think there's lots of misinformation about him as well. So I can't really say I know who exactly he was, what he was all about. And so I am neither like a defender nor promoter, I guess, of his stuff, because I know that a lot of it does not resonate with people. And I totally understand. I would say my main thing has always been his tarot deck. That is the thing that really speaks to me above anything else. And he conceptualized it and he had ideas around it, but obviously someone else illustrated it. And so, but I do think it's really intriguing and fascinating that he included this. And what I was going to say is that I think he had an understanding, though, that you really want to be what I've heard referred to as, I think they've said this about Thoth or Hermes or something, a science magician, essentially. That you want to understand the physical and the metaphysical, right? So you want to have an awareness of the spiritual, but you also want to have an understanding of the material world. And my favorite people throughout history tend to be of like mind that way. And so John Dee was like that, right? He was doing real shit back in the day, but he had this whole crazy understanding of what's going on, in the etheric realms, and he was in contact with certain things. Jack Parsons is very interesting too for that reason as well, because he was actually working with real materials and explosives and this and that, but he also had this understanding of magic, but he fused the two. And so I think that this is his kind of way of kind of acknowledging that, like, hey, it's really cool to know about all sorts of esoteric stuff and sigils and blah blah blah, but having an understanding of like real world physics and stuff is incredibly important. So I thought it was cool that he included that in the card.
Agreed, man.
Yeah. So if you progress to the next slide, you see that these are a few alternative sort of setups for the periodic table. So what we see, the most common sort of setup for it, I think that at some point it's just going to continue evolving, would be my guess, right? But people have tried different things. There's the hierarchical system that we just saw. There's the circular sort of setup, and then you've got this elongated horizontal version, and then whatever's going on with that other version too. It's all interesting. And if you want to just cruise through the next few slides, whenever you feel like it, you'll see a few other setups. So this is, I believe, Walter Russell, and I have a quote from him later on in the presentation as well. This is just where I'm at personally. I think it makes a lot of sense to organize things. And this just could be, I don't know if it's just straight sort of aesthetic sort of sensibilities or whatever, but I kind of feel called, and things tend to make more sense when things are designed in a circular sort of nature. And so when things are squared off and kind of cut off, as an example, like a lot of our calendars and stuff, it doesn't really, to me, I feel like it's not very holistic. But I think the circle in and of itself, it's like one of the most holistic shapes, if not the most holistic shape you can actually create. So I'm always aware of that whenever I see different types of charts or diagrams or whatever, or stuff that we use all the time. I always think about the nature of it being square versus the nature of it potentially being circular. And I think there's something to be said about the circular sort of setup and how it relates to the cosmos and everything else. So I like the fact that there's people out there who have attempted to do that and make sense of the elements that way. So you've got another setup here, right? Reminds me of the caduceus or something along those lines, right? Very interesting sort of take, but just kind of wrapping my head around the elements and seeing it presented in a different way, I felt was very helpful. So we've got a couple of more variations like that.
This is like
nice.
A Fibonacci sine wave thing going on here.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when music, I don't know how much this has to do with the octave model, but that's one of my favorite.
No, I think you're spot on with that. That's totally the deal. I don't know if you read that, but he actually has it 5th octave, 3rd octave, 1st octave. Yeah. So that's how he's interpreting it as well.
Right. Awesome. I've never seen this this illustration like this depicting the octaves in the chart. So that's cool. Can I shout out Miss Honeybee?
Please.
Thank you for the $50. Really appreciate it. Miss Honeybee. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Honeybee.
Enjoy the super sticker.
But yeah, excellent, dude. You totally picked up on it. Octaves. And that word has come up several times while researching the elements, over the past week. And so the next version, it kind of looks like a pill or something, but just thought I would include it once again, that people aren't at rest with the way in which we should maybe be organizing the elements. The next one is kind of trippy. So I just took screenshots of this video, and this is an old periodic table, and it is done on this scroll that's contained within that case, and it has a little dial or knob on the side. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to turn the dial, and then it rotates the scroll. And everything is done on a hierarchical level. So I'm pretty sure hydrogen, helium is at the very top, right? So if you cruise through the next few images, you'll just see more detailed sort of examples of that setup there. But I thought that was really, really fascinating that somebody thought to do it this way. And of course, me, everything reminds me of poles and the world axis. So there's also that. These are just a few images showing you the evolution of the modern periodic table, right? And so what I heard is that originally there was 12. I think there's more than that here. Obviously over the years, more and more and more have been added, right? So in the next slide, you'll see that there's a few more, and then a few more, and then a few more, until eventually we got to the point where we're at now with our 118. So this is an alternative setup that some people have proposed makes more sense. And so it's a vertical sort of design. And I looked into the nature of the periodic table, and why it's organized that way. Is that something that you've completely wrapped your head around by chance? There's a lot to know with all of this stuff, so that was the other thing too. Almost just being intimidated by all of the different rabbit holes you can go in with this.
No, I don't. I don't know much about the arrangement, other than I assume it's the least dense things all the way at the top and kind of the more dense things down at the bottom, but that's not entirely the case.
Right.
That's
right.
the general idea.
Totally. So there's a rhyme and reason behind everything, right? But people have said that actually, if you're going to teach students who actually aren't chemists, who aren't in industries where you need to know about these different compounds and variables and stuff, that for the layman, that this actually makes a lot more sense. I don't know if that's true or not, but even just visually, the structure is even more appealing and everything else. So just thought I would include that version too. And then the next slide is showing you what it might look like here in the future. And I believe there's people have theorized or done the math, what have you, that there should be perhaps up to 172 elements, right? So again, it's just going to continue evolving. And my understanding too is that a lot of the synthetic man-made elements are the heaviest elements. So that's kind of a curious sort of thing. So the more synthetic, the more we needed technology, the heavier of the element that we are actually creating and expanding upon. And also, when we get back to the main chart, at some point I know we will, but what's at the bottom actually, it should be squeezed right in there, making the periodic table really, really long. And so the fact that there's a separate section down below is mostly out of convenience so that you can print it on a piece of paper. Otherwise, it would be really, really long. So the bottom section, that bottom rectangle, could be fused right into the periodic table. That's where it belongs. But instead, we just put it down below to save space, basically.
Sure.
So obviously, there's lots of interesting symbolism with some of the elements, some of the metals, and what corresponded with it as far as a glyph is concerned. So the three alchemical elements or philosophical elements they've been called, right? Sulfur, salt, mercury, and then it just has the four elements right there. This is a really common basic sort of table here. And then, of course, I'm sure most people here are aware of the planets and the metals, right? But there you go. Moon corresponds with silver, Mercury, quicksilver, Venus, copper, Sun, gold, Mars, iron. And I have a few specific things about Mars because I actually did a video about it a couple years ago. Jupiter with tin, and then Saturn with lead. So here's a few more. And these glyphs, these sigils, there's so many variations on all of these things. And so I've looked into certain specific metals, and you will see like 4, 5, 6 variations of that glyph. And so there must have been different schools of thought. There must have been different time periods, different ways people looked at these symbols. Notice iron, and notice that it looks just like the symbol for Mars, right? Which I think is really intriguing. Looking just aesthetically at lead too. To me, there's something very fascinating about it. I included another lead icon in a couple of slides, but it feels like it feels kind of weighted down. I think the other icon that I'm going to share with you here in a bit feels very much the same way. But people can just look at this and come to their own conclusions. It's always interesting just to kind of think, who created these and when did they become standardized, I guess, to those people or whatever. And what was the rhyme or reason, behind some of these. Like gold, gold is interesting. It looks like there's definitely momentum behind it. It almost looks to me, it's like almost like a comet or something like that, right? But then it has these two lines that kind of unfurl. It very much reminds me of, the Aries glyph or something like that. The symbol for spring kind of has a very similar sort of thing going on there as well, right?
Yeah, it seems to me to be a crown. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah.
Kind of like And then you're also on the money with the Aries because the sun exalts
Yeah.
in Aries. So gold is a favorable metal. And
Right.
I'd say with ever, the glyphs, you have to kind of go off the mood, the characteristics. Is it for Mars, for example, with the little prod, with the little tip, the tipped arrow, that indicates a masculine nature, whereas Venus with the T or the upside down Ankh indicates a feminine nature. So if the symbol's kind of betraying that basic nature, it might be overcomplicated or a lot more a lot more subjective. Whereas
Right.
the bare bones iron Mars glyph, you can't go wrong with it because it indicates the bare nature. So
That's right. Yeah, exactly. One thing I'll mention is the fact that I think it's intriguing. My buddy Ben Balderson, who's actually like a lab alchemist, and that's one of the things he really emphasizes. Is he says that a lot of people, they're reading all day perhaps about alchemy and maybe the elements and different reactions and whatever, but it's another thing to actually be in the lab and working with some of this stuff. So he actually has a physical lab. He's been doing stuff in his lab for years and years and years now. And so he's a good one to talk to when it comes to anything elemental, anything having to do with chemistry and things like that. And he also is someone that puts a lot of stock into Polaris and the pole star, right? And so he says, according to his research, what he's putting out there, so this is his thing more than mine, but he thinks that if there's an appropriate correspondence on a metallic level with Polaris, it's platinum. And so he makes that relationship clear. He's talked about it before in some of his videos. So whenever I see platinum, that's something that I do think about. And I haven't done my own sort of follow-up independent research about that, but it's something that, I'll probably get around to at some point. So is that the appropriate correspondence? I'm not really sure, but just wanted to mention it for people.
Sure, yeah, man.
Yeah. All right. So I did a video a couple years ago, and it was all about Mars, and it was all about iron. And these are some of the drawings that I did in that video on a whiteboard. And all of these symbols are for iron, have been used for iron at one point or another. So look at how they all have arrows, right? Most of them are pointing to the upper right, just like Mars. There's a couple that are pointing upward. And then even the one on the left, right? I mean, if you just remove those dots, that's the symbol for Sagittarius right there, which
Right.
has a correspondence with Jupiter.
Yeah, can I show real quick just so people don't get
Please. Yeah, do your thing, man.
people don't get confused. The runes for Sagittarius are the Tivas, which is the Tyr rune, and Birkana or Burkana, however you want to say it. So the T and the B, T, right? You get a lot of T words with Sag. So he's right. The Mars rune, even though Mars does not rule Sagittarius, it's not indicated in Sagittarius astrologically. The fiery nature of Sagittarius comes from somewhere, and that's because there is an association with the runes. And there's 24 runes, depending on what kind of alphabet you're using. And 2 of them correspond to each of the signs of the zodiac. So the
Right.
T, this is also where you get Mars rules agitation, but you don't get the word agitated from Aries, which rules arrogance. And, Aries, you get it from Sagittarius, agita, sagitta. So, okay.
Nice. Yeah, you're totally spot on. A couple things about iron that I was reminded of, and because we're here talking about it. So my understanding is that men have more iron in their blood and women have more copper in their blood in general, right? Isn't that interesting? Just given the nature Obviously the old adage, or it's actually not even that old, but men are from Mars, women are from Venus, that whole entire thing. I think that's kind of curious. Men in general, more iron in their blood, women more copper. The other thing I was reminded of too is that given the Sagittarian sort of nature of that arrow, the mantra for Sagittarius is I aim. And then if you just remove the I in aim, it's I am, which is the mantra for Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So I think that's kind of a curious sort of thing, that there's just a one letter difference between the mantras for Aries and Sagittarius. So just thought I would put that out there. And then I do have another glyph for lead. This is just a complete random sort of thing that I threw in here. But just thinking about lead and thinking about Saturn, and Saturn obviously is more so related to restriction or compression or partitions or walls, right? And so under the traditional system, it was the furthest planet out. And so it has a lot to do with barriers. And I just look at this glyph and I see a Saturnian sort of correspondence here with it, because it's capped, right? It's capped, and then everything that's really going on with the glyph is happening underneath. And so it's almost kind of like being weighed down in a way. Or it almost looks like it's something that's happening like underneath the earth, like that upper line is perhaps symbolic of the earth, and then this stuff is happening underneath. So that was just something I was just flipping through a book that I have that has a lot of these glyphs in it. It's called The Book of Signs. It's a really cool, interesting, small book by this guy named Rudolph Koch. And anyway, I was flipping through it and I'm like, oh, you know what? That looks very Saturnian. So I decided to include it just for fun. And then before we got on air, you were bringing up this correspondence, which is essentially new to me. So you're going to have to take the wheel on that one. But this is Santos Bonacci. I was looking for periodic table of elements videos that maybe got into the astrology or the esoteric side of things. And there's really not that much out there, but he did have one. And he basically is saying that element 85 through 94 relates to those planets right there: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, etc. So it sounds like this is something that you're already aware of, though, right? So you're muted.
Sorry, man. There's a little bit of a thunderstorm going on, so
oh yeah,
I'm
you're all good.
Trying to spare the audience. But so I want to pull up a different table.
Sure.
So that everyone can see what's going on. Here we go. Okay. So you've got many different sequences within the table of elements. And just because we're finding one sequence doesn't mean it's substantiating this kind of, arrangement structure of the table, but it's harmonious nonetheless. So we see down here in the 80s, we have, what are these old names? I'm lost. Okay, Lithium. Damn, this is like a different. All right, I'm a little lost. But basically,
what are you looking for?
The sequence. You're saying up right there, you've got
so 85 through 94.
85 through 94.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which 85 is astatine, followed by radon.
Right. Okay, yeah, here we go. So, actium, okay, it's better to go backwards because plutonium is Pluto, obviously. Neptunium is Neptune. Uranium, Uranus. Now, these are the ones where you kind of have to interpret it. Protactinium. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Protactinium. To protect, defense, fences, protection, kind of to lock things down. This is a very Saturnian concept, defense. Whereas Mars rules offense, so we're going to get into that too. Whereas, Jupiter is more the peace sign. Thorium is Thor, Jupiter, without a doubt. There's no getting around that. Thor, Arthur, the author, creator, so that's Thor, thorium. Actinium, I always say actium. Actinium is Mars. Mars rules action. Right, so this is what we're screwing me up. So now we drop down to 88. I believe.
Radium.
Okay. Right, you've got radium associated with the sun. It's got to be Ray.
Correct,
and we go down again. Where's Lithium, though?
Okay, so that's 71.
Yeah.
Is it? Yep.
I was looking at a chart before where, I always get thrown off with Lithium because that's a big Venusian archetype. That's what I was looking for earlier.
Okay.
I was expecting Lithium to be in the sequence for Venus, but Francium, of course, France, the land, France, Frank. It's Venus, it's blunt, it's to be frank, to be blunt, is to be Venusian, like a cow, or dense, dull, imposing. Also frankincense, there's many different fragrance, Freya, it's very, so I see Francium, but with Lithium, I guess that corresponds more to Libra itself, because it's Lucifer, it's the Libra, it's lute, which is the stringed instrument. So
that's interesting that you're linking it to Libra, because in some decks, the major arcana card that corresponds with Libra is the Justice card, which is the 8th. And so 71 for Lithium, 7 + 1 = 8, right? So there's a ton of stuff like that in here too that I feel like I personally am just barely scratching the surface. And kind of to your point, or something that Santos even mentioned in this video, he's basically saying that the different planets, there's different octaves of relationships with different metals. So there's more than one element that corresponds with the moon or Venus or whatever. So that's just kind of the nature of the whole entire thing. It's not just exclusive to one element.
Agreed. That's a good distinction or point to make.
I thought so too.
The last two here would be Mercury, Radon. Radon is intrinsically linked to radium. Radium and radon go hand in hand. That makes perfect sense because the sun goes nowhere without Mercury right by its side. Mercury is the little servant. They're having a bit of an identity crisis too, because you have in Norse mythology and many other cosmologies, you have Odin being both the sun and Mercury. So Odin is Mercury and the sun. They don't make a distinction between the two. That's why in so many mythologies, Mercury, Hermes, Mercury himself, Hermes, Merlin is not a full-blown god. He's less than a god, but higher than man, because he's an intermediary between us and the gods. So radon, radium, perfect. The identity crisis between Mercury and the sun. Then the moon, Astarte, Ishtar, Shelia.
Nice. Well, adding to your identity crisis thing, Mercury's full cycle, right, is 88 days. And that's radium, which corresponds with the sun.
Wow.
So that's kind of intriguing.
That's a good one. Love it.
Nice. Very cool. So I thought that was absolutely worth sharing. And then what you proposing, this stream did to me was it got me looking into the nature of the atom itself and what's going on with all of that. And so the first thing I thought of was Manly P. Hall's illustration of an atom that he included in Secret Teachings. And so that's what I have on the next slide. And obviously, Secret Teachings came out, I think, in 1927 or 29 or something. I may do I have the years right with that? I think that's about right. And so, do you have do you know around when it came out by chance?
I think it would have been a little before then, but you could be right on the money.
Right. I could be mixed up too because I think it maybe came out when he was 27 or 29.
Originally published 1928 is what I'm seeing.
Okay.
Online.
Right.
That's just the first thing that pops up though.
So this is actually one of the first illustrations in that book, right? And so it's referred to as Babbitt's atom from a book called Principles of Light and Color. And so notice all of the swirls. I see a very toroidal thing going on here. So right up top, it says the negative end. And then down below, it says that there's a positive end. And when I first saw this, I just assumed, well, this is just really outdated, right? They didn't know what was really going on. They didn't have the technology to understand what an atom really looks like. But now, especially over the last few days, I'm starting to revisit what I understand about the atom and what might be propaganda or whatever. And so it's interesting that there's a toroidal nature with this graphic here, because the image that sits opposite of this graphic, which is like really truly one of the first plates in the main part of the book, is an image called A Group of World Religions. And there you go. So on the left-hand side, A Group of World Religions. On the right-hand side, you see this toroidal in nature, I think arguably atom, right? A Group of World Religions, when you really look into it, it's all about the bull. And so he's showing like 7 or 8 different instances of world religions that had a bull significantly tied to, its origin story. And so in the upper left, there's Taurus, and then you see Aries, and then you see the fish, and then you see Aquarius. And then, do you mind going back real quick?
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. You're all good. And then you see the tetramorph cherubim angels. And so you see another cow to the left of the lamb that's on the book with the 7 seals. To the right, you see the Apis bull, and there's a figure right next to him or her, because it could be a cow, right, of the Nile. And then you see the golden calf. And then down below, you see a cosmic bull breaking the cosmic egg right behind Muhammad. And then on the lower right, you see Mithras slaying the cosmic bull. And so the bull is what links all of these religions together, in his opinion. And so again, this is like the first real plate that you're going to see in this book. So isn't it interesting that you have bull cow symbolism, so therefore Taurus symbolism, and then on the right-hand side, you have this atom that's toroidal in nature. So I think that that's kind of an interesting sort of juxtaposition here between these two pages, what they're trying to show. Bulls, cows, Taurus, and then this Taurus field looking thing on the right. So when I first came across that, I kind of geeked out on it. So had to include it. And then over on the next slide, I have a circumpunct. So the circumpunct, it's the target symbol, right? If everything was just a little thicker, it's the Godhead, right? I see it personally. If you're going to look in most symbolic dictionaries, they're going to say, and rightfully so in a lot of ways, that it's the glyph for the sun, right? My understanding, based on my research, I think that it actually had more of a geocentric sort of attachment to it before it had a heliocentric sun-based attachment to it. So I see it as a polar glyph. I see the center part as the pole, perhaps the North Pole, the point of origin and the point of return, or conversely too, the North Star, and then the revolution of the heavens around it, right? And so I've said this before, but I think that there was a major polar to solar switch that happened at one point. And I think that a lot of symbols that were once geocentric, earth-based, polar tradition symbols were later adapted to become solar tradition, heliocentric symbols. And I think that the circumpunct is perhaps one of these symbols, right? It also looks like an eye. Arguably, it's an egg. It's a seed. The whole thing behind it is that everything comes from that dot, but also returns to that dot as well, sort of thing. That's one way it's been expressed. Or that the dot comes from the circle comes from the dot. It's kind of this toroidal thing. You know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But it does represent a sacred center, right? Well, the reason why I bring this up, because in the modern world, when you're looking at the atom, this is what they show you that it looks like, which is the next slide. So they say that this is the simplest atom you can have, that this would be hydrogen. So you have the dot in the middle, you have the proton in the middle, and then you have the electron revolving around it, right? And so most times you're going to see that the dot in the middle is going to have a plus on it, or a P for proton, and then the electron is going to have an E, or it's going to have a minus symbol on it, right? And so what they say is that what happens is electrons jump from atom to atom based on their arrangement, based on how many rings there are on the atom, and this is how chemical reactions occur, right? So it all has to do with what they refer to as a charged electron, a charged particle. And so this is something that we'll get into by the end of the presentation. But if we're just looking at this basic sort of framework, this basic sort of setup, I see polar symbolism, right? The proton, the P, I think of projective, right? I think of progress. I think of the P for pole, right? I think of the fact that it's a stationary thing, the pole, the world axis, and things revolve around it. So I think of the cosmic wheel and the stars revolving around the pole star. And then when it comes to the electron, if this is really how it works, it's feminine, right? It's receptive. It can hold energy, right? It's related to the minus symbol. And so it's going around the pole. And so to me, I think it's really fascinating that this is what hydrogen supposedly looks like. And you were talking about it a week or two ago, the fact that you relate hydrogen to the high dragon, right? Which I think I'm down for that. I think that's really fascinating. So adding to that weave, basically, if this is the high dragon, and if this is the simplest element you can actually have, it reminds me very much of Draco, the dragon, revolving around the pole star, which I have in my next slide.
Wow.
So the tip of the tail of Ursa Minor, which is the Little Dipper, is the pole star. And the only constellation that exists between the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper is Draco. And so you have this dragon revolving around this central point in the heavens, right? And so when I see symbolism relating the serpent to a tree, or the serpent wrapping around, exactly, totally. And so it's the same symbolism, exactly right.
Wow.
So if you just skip to the next slide, you'll just see a really classic sort of rendition of the Adam and Eve story, right?
Ooh, those look like oranges.
I know. That's why I picked it, actually.
Awesome. I know. I'm flattered.
Yeah, man. And so the serpent around the tree, the serpent around the staff, to me, I relate it back to Draco revolving around the world axis, revolving around that pole, right? And so there's a number of myths that are essentially about the same sort of thing, that this paradise, Eden, the Arctic region, the Arctic homeland, that there's this world axis sort of phallic thing, and oftentimes there is a serpent wrapping around it, exactly like, the stripper pole sort of metaphor. So the next image is from the Vedic tradition, and there's many variations on this theme. Nice. So that is actually a serpent named Vasuki. And so this serpent was wrapped around a world mountain, a central mountain, right? And there was 2 sets of demigods, and they were tugging at the serpent. This is symbolic of the churning of heaven. The churning of the cosmic milk is one way that it's been described. And so as they churned, as they had this tug of war with this world serpent around the world mountain, they actually created the nectar of the gods, which is like a nectar of immortality, right? And when this nectar was produced, an eagle picked it up. It was in a pot called a kumb, and the eagle took the pot, flew across India on its way to deliver it safely because it was such a highly sought after nectar. 4 drops.
The kumb?
The kumb. Yeah. Exactly. You get it. So it dropped 4 droplets, I believe, across India, and they landed in different rivers. And to this day, for like ever, this is where they have their Kumbh Mela, which is called the celebration of the pot. And Kumbh is also what they call Aquarius as well. And there's lots of Aquarian symbolism as it relates to the eagle as well, which is really interesting. And so anyway, so the whole entire idea, though, is once again another story about a world serpent being wrapped around this central axis symbol, which in this case looks like a standing stone or whatever, but in other depictions, it's a mountain.
Lingam stone. Looks like
Yes,
here too.
Totally.
And your point, real quick, your point about eagle and Aquarius, what do they have to do with each other? Well, aqua is the prefix or kind of root for water, but aqui, it means eagle. Aquiline. Aquiline. If you have an aquiline face like me, like an aquiline nose, means you have like a, beak or like a hawk like face, or eagle, hawk, aquiline.
Right. Totally.
Bird like.
The other thing that comes to mind is Zeus turned himself into an eagle, and he had his way with a water bearer who was kind of like a slave named Ganymede, unless I'm saying it wrong or whatever. And so he, right? So he had his way with Ganymede after he turned himself into an eagle. So there's like statues and paintings and whatever of this young boy servant, and he has a pitcher, and sometimes the pitcher is being poured, but he's right next to an eagle, right? So he's the water bearer, which is what Aquarius is, right? The water bearer. So yeah, so the eagle Aquarian connection, there's a handful of things going on there, but it's a part of this mythology right here. And then also, I just have to say, notice the rings. I'm just noticing this. Notice that there's concentric rings emanating from this lingam, or from this world mountain sort of thing, right? This is also the nature of the atom. So they say that there's rings, right, to it. And these different rings can hold different amounts of electrons, right? And so I put a lot of stock into personally. I think, well, I know for a fact that there were a lot of cultures that had a ring land sort of system to them, that there was this sort of sacred center. Oftentimes it would be a temple, and then there would be ring lands that expanded out. And these different ring lands actually were used for different purposes, right? For farming, and maybe for wealthy people or people of from a specific sort of lineage or whatever. And so when I hear Lord of the Rings, is it actually Lord of the Ringlands? And it just reminds me of the fact that Atlantis, Plato's Atlantis, was a concentric ring sort of thing. Oh, nice, dude. What's up, Benjamin?
Or you know this guy?
Oh, Ben's a homie. Yeah, he's awesome. That's who I was talking about earlier with the
Nice.
lab alchemy.
Nice.
Yeah, man. He's great.
Yeah, good comment.
For sure, for sure. So, it also seems to me that people, what they were doing was they looked in the heavens under the polar tradition or a geocentric sort of tradition, and they saw that there was this central star that has never moved, according to some people. And the heavens were revolving around it. And so they basically thought, as above, so below. If this is good enough for the heavens and for the gods above, it's good enough for my family and for my tribe. Let's have a sacred center tree. Let's have a sacred center meeting location. And let's create a ringland sort of system that expands sort of outward. So has that been something you've come across by chance, or is that a thread that you've been interested in at all?
In what particular aspect?
Kind of like a ringland sort of structure, and that there's this central sort of pole or central sort of temple or monument or something, and that in today's world you tend to see things that are more in a grid-like sort of way, right? More squared off and whatever.
Right. So the Box Saga is very heavy on the ringland concept. Now, that tends to be more like a honeycomb arrangement where they're kind of squeezed in next to each other, but right down to the UN logo with the Arctic Circle, Tropic of Cancer or Capricorn, Equator, and out there's no South Pole star like you said. So of course, to me, this is the model of the universe.
Same. Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. So I even heard, I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but I have a book about Native American traditions. And literally, I was blown away to see that the author included a traditional circular sort of hut structure, right? And he was saying that the hearth in the middle of the hut and the opening of the roof to allow smoke and heat to escape, that they were literally modeling their actual, Lord of the Rings. They modeled their home after a cosmological understanding, that the center of the home was the world axis to them, and that the opening up top from their circular home was symbolic of the pole star. And, it just all kind of like fits really nicely that way. And so he was saying that in this book, and I was like, whoa, I mean, that's fascinating that, he included that, and he just wrote it plainly. So I think that's intriguing. And so I'm not exactly sure this exact story, but I am aware of a Buddhist myth involving another world serpent around a central sort of mountain, right? So again, just furthering this whole entire thing, Draco around the pole star. I think a lot of it goes back to that. And when you look at Draco too, it looks exactly, I've been studying it lately. I've been looking at it as much as I can. And it's really interesting. It really, it comes across, it reads as a serpent once you know what to look for, basically. So, and not all of the constellations do that. But regarding this central sort of thing and these rings around it, right? And how the atom might actually function, I can't not think of the solar system and how we've been kind of taught its ways, right? So in the next slide, I have just a little solar system sort of thing, right? With these styrofoam balls.
Whoa. Hang on, y'all. Don't get triggered, everyone. Okay.
No. Exactly right. So this is not how I understand things. This is not how I interpret things, right? But isn't it interesting, though, that the general dynamic, the general framework is very similar to what they teach us about the atom, right? And what do they do here? They say that the sun is the central core of this system and all of the planets revolve around it. I think really the whole debate about, what's really going on here it really comes down to, I think a lot of it has to do just with spin and movement. It's, do you think the heavens are spinning or do you think the earth is spinning, right? And from there you have either a heliocentric sort of perspective or you have a geocentric perspective. I'm more of a geocentrist. I think that earth is center stage in a lot of ways, and I think that the heavens are revolving around us. And I think it's kind of interesting that we've been taught so much heliocentrism, so much solar worship, that a lot of people put more stock into the sun than they actually do the actual earth that they walk on, that has given you everything. Obviously, the sun is important. I have my own reverence for the sun and all of the stars and planets and luminaries and whatever. But I just think that that is kind of the core flip, is what they've done, is everything revolves around that thing right there, which is constantly moving, and what you actually live on is spinning and twirling and all this other stuff. And that's just not my perspective. It's not my experience. But I had to unlearn a lot of this stuff, right, over time. So the reason why I bring this up too.
Can I deal with this?
Please, dude.
So, real quick.
Yeah.
Mr. TX Shore Dog, or Mrs. Source for Acqui equals Eagle. Now, I'm not saying it purely translates to eagle, but here we are. Aquila is the genus of true eagles. The genus name is Latin for eagle, possibly derived from Aquilus. Dark in color. Sea eagles, so that's the distinction. Things like ospreys, sea eagles, or at least that's the inspiration for the name. And yes, even, yeah, okay, there we go. So everyone's on the same page.
Nice. So I would say too, where if, gun to my head, it's more of a, I just have an understanding that what we are living in is not what we've been taught more than anything else. What is it exactly? Is it more of a field? Is it a Taurus field? Is it a cosmic egg? Is it more of a world tree? Is it all of the above? I don't know. We'll see what I'm thinking about in 10, 20 years or whatever. But I don't buy, the traditional sort of heliocentric model as it is. But because it reminded me of the atom, I had to include it. And so speaking of, I'm going down this rabbit hole right now, thanks to you, of questioning whether electrons even exist. It's totally a thing. And I have a quote on the next slide. And this comes from Ken Wheeler. He's quoting Walter Russell. And I can read that for you guys. And apparently Walter Russell, Tesla, a bunch of these guys did not think that an electron was even feasible or possible. And that even that, I can't remember which guy said it, but that it's considered a psychosis. He thinks it's psychotic to think that the electron works the way it works. But that is to say, though, also, it appears as though the math behind the elements is accurate, that the mathematics that is needed in order to combine different things and create different things, that is accurate, but it's the mechanics behind everything that's inaccurate. So it's kind of interesting that that's the dynamic. But Walter Russell said, to describe an electron as a negatively charged body is equivalent to saying that it is an expanding, contracting particle. There is no such condition in nature as a negative charge. And so that's what they're saying about electrons, right? Nor are there negatively charged particles. Charge and discharge are opposite conditions, as filling and emptying or compressing and expanding are opposite conditions. So Walter Russell.
This is like where are the south pointing magnets? Why can't we find a southern pole and walk around it with our southern pointing magnets? Because everything is relative to north. That's the only fixed magnetic center. And then the southern polarity is just the absence of northern polarity, the farther away you get.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, the way the atom has been proposed, I look at it, I see so many things like this, so I don't want to sound like a broken record. It feels very heliocentric to me. It feels like it came out of a solar tradition, essentially. And when you listen to a mainstream scientist talk about atoms and the elements, Big Bang this, just on down the line, there's so many different things that as he was mentioning how these elements function and what the deal is and whatever, just because I hadn't visited that kind of information in a long time, my red flags just started really going off with everything, where I'm like, man, I don't know if these guys actually know what they're talking about, in a lot of different ways. And so this is a construct that basically has been promoted, I think, for a lot of different reasons. But supposedly, according to Ken Wheeler, the people that pretty much invented the electric grid and everything else and a lot of modern technology gave us the fundamentals to have stuff like computers and cell phones and everything else. Those guys were saying that electrons aren't feasible and they're not logical and that's not how they work, and that the power line to your house isn't just sending electrons through it so that you can plug in your phone or whatever. And so I'm at the process of unlearning right now. And so I'm unlearning things. So I am not the best person to speak to regarding the true nature of electricity, of magnetism, how atoms function and everything else. But I will say what I have picked up, though, it appears to be, and I don't know where you're at with ether, but it appears to be that this is all in an effort to suppress what's going on with ether. And this has kind of been a thing that's been going on for a long time, too. The nature of ether, how it works. I think that it's probably likely that before whatever sort of reset, if there was one, or before like a true heliocentric transition, that I think people maybe had a better understanding of ether and what it's all about. And so has the ether been something that you've looked into seriously?
I wouldn't say seriously, but I've got an understanding.
Sure. Right. So Ken Wheeler's saying that it's really people, physicists, or chemists that had an etheric understanding of things, that they knew that it's more of an etheric sort of principle and mechanics that you're dealing with, versus what we're currently being taught. That electrons are not apparently jumping from atom to atom, and they're not being sent through our cables and power systems and everything else. That things simply just work in a different way. So that's interesting. And because I'm questioning this stuff as of like only the last 6 days, really, because you proposed this conversation, I'm like, well, the whole entire thing with the atomic bomb, there's some sketchy stuff going on with the atomic bomb. And so I'm not sure if that's something you've looked into as well. And I'm more of a symbologist, so I like signs and symbols and tarot and everything else. So some of this stuff is outside my wheelhouse, but I think that the atomic bomb, that there's some fuckery going on there. So the next slide basically is to illustrate that point. Right. So a lot of people have said, like, what happened to the camera? Kind of looks like a little model. How did they film this so closely when there was an atomic bomb going off? And the basic gist is that when it comes to the powers that be, in some ways, they completely overhype the technology that they have at their disposal, and then they undersell the technology that they have at their disposal. And it's like, that's how they keep things obfuscated. So I think that it makes sense to me personally that nuclear bombs, atomic bombs, they're not what they're cracked up to be. And some of the instances where they've said that they've dropped them, it's actually more of a firebombing. So there's actually multiple bombs going off. Devastating, definitely devastating. I would never say it's not like that, right? But it seems like that is kind of the deal, is that they've overemphasized the threat of these nuclear bombs.
Mario from Symbolic Studies. Bombs don't exist.
That's the headline, yeah. I just have to ask, is that a rabbit hole you've gone down?
Oh, dude, I've completely gone down that. For sure. Firebomb is completely, I think, the true culprit for a lot of these mass casualty events. If you just look at Dresden, okay,
totally, yeah,
which was clearly on par with what we see in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think those are the two. It's basically it's an intimidation tactic, control tactic. It's this mutual destruction, mutual extinction paradigm where, oh, don't worry, guys, everyone be safe. We've all got enough nukes to where we're all scared of each other to the same point where no one will ever use them. And that's kind of like the security that our foreign affairs are operated under. So I think that's, it's a lot of garbage. The fire bombs, you have, everyone's seen pictures from Japan after this supposed big boy and little guy, or whatever they were calling him. And you can see some of the ruins or still standing structures have like hanging paper. And the paper is still standing, meaning if this was like a singular shock wave that went through and kind of blasted everything or dusted everything the same, you wouldn't have this unless this was an area that was kind of spared from the fire. The fire didn't reach it, but
Right.
And-
Exactly.
and last point, every explosion, regardless of what the material is, leaves radiation. That's another thing. So it doesn't have to be a nuclear bomb for an explosion to leave radiation, and birth defects to be caused by battlefields. It doesn't have to be nuclear by nature. But yeah. So I've gone down that rabbit hole. Not an expert by any means.
Me neither.
But
Right. That's why I was a little hesitant to bring up some of this stuff, but I'm like, I'm just going to put it out there. People could do their own research. You don't have to take my word for any of it, obviously. In fact, I prefer that you don't. And then I think it's interesting, too, just the fact that I am now, at this moment, looking into the nature of the atom, electrons, the atomic bomb, all this other stuff. And then we have Oppenheimer that just came out, right? And so that's the next slide. It's just the movie poster. But I think that this is like perfect propaganda. And
yes,
I'm a Chris Nolan fan. I think he makes fun popcorn movies. You know, in a lot of ways, I kind of think he's like a newer Kubrick. And so I know that he's a propagandist filmmaker. He probably gets an opportunity to make what he wants to make on occasion, but in exchange for something like this. Right. And so when he comes out with a movie, people pay attention. And I just think it's kind of curious timing that this just recently came out.
for sure, man. It is kind of, I did like his movies too. It's sad to see him kind of going more like, all right, what's on the agenda next?
Right.
You know, Hollywood.
Right.
Like what issue are we tackling now? It's like Inception was really good, but it's really diving into like this Einsteinian relativity and
Right. Yeah.
time bending, playing with reality and things like that. But
Totally.
and then I did not like Interstellar at all. I thought it was garbage, personally.
Well, when it came out, I was already questioning whether people were going to space or not and everything else. So it really, it's science fiction used to be one of my favorite genres, but it is full of propaganda. And so science fiction, I would say in and of itself, it's a propaganda genre in so many different ways. It's what has sold people on the idea of going to outer space and what it's like to land on a planet and what planets actually are and all this other kind of stuff, you know. And Kubrick with 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, it's like most filmmakers copied his formula after he came out with that film. And obviously he collaborated with NASA and all sorts of other people to put that out there. So again, the parallels between Kubrick and Nolan are definitely there. And science fiction as a genre, it's kind of just, it's ruined for me now. I still appreciate it every once in a while, just to, whatever. If it's a popcorn movie, I'm down or whatever. But by and large, though, it's not what it used to be for me.
The original Dune. You ever watch the original Dune?
You know what, man? I think I borrowed it from a friend, and I think I tried to watch it. I don't know if I made it all the way through.
Right. If you're not stoned, it might be pretty tough to get through because it is strange. It's surrealist, but
Is that the David Lynch one?
yeah, love it.
Okay.
Even he doesn't like the movie, but it's really good. Good science fiction. To me, it has to be like over the top and corny. That's the best science fiction, you know. But whatever.
You ever check out Jodorowsky's Dune?
Yes.
The documentary?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good one. I mean, that would have been amazing if it came out.
I know you like Jodorowsky. He's like the he's I was just talking about I ended up some people came in to buy Tarot a couple days ago. We were talking about El Topo and Holy Mountain. So yeah. People love him today too.
Right. Yeah. I in small doses, but I appreciate him just as like a character and stuff. So anyways, that is what I have for you, dude.
So yeah. This is the
final slide.
It's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Yep. Exactly. So I do have just miscellaneous thoughts if you wanted to look at the periodic table. I have a couple of opinions even about the main sort of setup with it, and potential, synchronicities or whatever for folks who are interested. So I don't know if there was any other like elements you wanted to talk about specifically or any angles or whatever, but I'm down because I know I have just other things to share.
Well, I thought we could just go through the names of as many elements as we could get through.
Okay.
Starting with we went through helium a little bit already. Or sorry, hydrogen. We already went
hydrogen
a little. But we can start off with helium and then just go down with the common elements and see how many we get to.
Yeah, totally. So maybe just real quick, if you don't mind, pulling up that first slide which shows the main table in full view.
Mm-hmm. 1 sec.
Yeah, sure.
Boom.
Got it. So I'm not sure if I'm seeing it on my end, actually.
You can't see it?
It maybe is my connection or something. I can't see it, though. Maybe other people can. If that's the case, that's totally cool. I have a notoriously slow connection over here. There it is. Nice. There you go.
Okay.
So one of the things I noticed, obviously, when I look at symbolism, and so I'm sure I've probably mentioned this before, but I've been a graphic designer for like 20 plus years. And so my eye is refined because it's had to be. It's just my profession or whatever. So when I look at a canvas, I always am looking at the general sort of structure or framework or composition or whatever. And so what do you have here with the periodic table of elements? You've got Twin Peaks, right? You've got Twin Peaks. You got the Twin Peaks with hydrogen and with helium, right? And so I see kind of this double mountain sort of thing going on, right? And it's interesting that they both start with H, okay? And so this got me thinking immediately of the 4-lettered name of God, which is the Tetragrammaton, which is Yod He Vav He, right? So it's 4 letters, Yod He Vav He. Isn't it interesting that one letter appears twice? So this is the 4-lettered name of God, the Kabbalistic, under a Kabbalistic sort of tradition or whatever, and there's 2 H's, right? That must mean that the H is very, very significant. And so He in Hebrew means window, right? So to me, that maybe extends to perhaps the firmament. There's a correspondence with He and it relating to the star card. And so I think that arguably even the woman in the star card, the esoteric alternative hermetic title for the star card, is daughter of the firmament, right? And that's what He corresponds with. So is this window a window to the other side, right? Is it a reference to a portal, or a gateway of some sort? Perhaps, but that's what He means. It means window. So Yod, He, Vav, He, and then you have H and then He up there. And my understanding is generally He is spelled He, right? And so there you have it right there. So the twin peaks relating to the letter H, I think is intriguing. And I've been reading a lot of Kenneth Grant lately, which I've talked to Juan about, and he gets into some pretty far out stuff. But according to his research, what he's put out there, and I read this a couple months ago, is that twin peaks are symbolic of a polar tradition, and that the peak in and of itself is symbolic of a polar tradition as well. And so twin peaks, whether it's two mountains or two towers or two pillars, I would say symbolically they're very much related. And I always say this, but if you see two mountains or two towers or two pillars or columns, there is an implied third column. There is an implied gateway. There's implied a middle way or a middle path. There's a passage through, basically. So when you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, you will see that it's made up of, excuse me, it's made up of three pillars. So there's two pillars on the side, and then there's one pillar in the middle that transcends the two other pillars. And the central pillar in the Kabbalistic tree of life has a hidden sephiroth on it named Doth. And Doth is the gateway to the root side of the Kabbalistic tree, which is known as the Klipothic tree, or the night side of Eden, right? And so, and that hidden sephiroth, Doth, corresponds with the north. That's what all of these occult people have been saying from my research, right? So twin peaks, twin pillars, there's a middle way, and personally I can see the correspondence with a polar tradition with this twin peak sort of setup or dynamic, and peaks in general too. Climbing the mountain, right? It's one of the great metaphors we have in terms of storylines and struggle and accomplishment and everything else. But climbing the mountain is emblematic of climbing the central mountain, I would say, which we kind of talked about earlier. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Just the H's, Yod He Vav He, Twin Peaks, which implies then that there's this valley, obviously down below too. So that's kind of what I see with the general sort of structure of the periodic table.
Shall yeah, man.
So take it or leave it, but that's kind of just my 2 cents with it. So hydrogen and helium. Let's see. I mean, this is where I feel like there's just so many different ways we can go about approaching all of this stuff. But to me, it's amazing how common helium is. And, someone like myself or most lay people, it's like we just know it as the thing that makes our voice sound funny. But it is incredibly important, right, for so many different things. And the thing that people always say, too, is that NASA, I can't remember what the figure is, but they were like the biggest purchaser, I think, of helium, like on the whole entire planet, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, you were showing hydrogen with the single kind of, the single dot on the circle, right?
Yeah.
Well, helium, you're going to have two dots going around that central polar fixed pinwheel with the circle going around it, right? So this indicates hell or Helsinki.
Ooh.
Hell. Helios, yes, is the sun, and Leo and Helios, and absolutely. But with helium, that element is indicating Helsinki. Right. Helium, you have the sun and the moon revolving around hell, fixed at the center. And then also, here I'm going to pull up this one so we can zoom in on each of these a little more.
Perfect.
Hydrogen, the high dragon, far left, high up left. Then you have helium. Now let's talk about elements too. And, not that everything goes back to Finland, but a lot of it does, especially when we're using words. There is a Finnish demon called Piru. Piru. And I don't know if he's a demon, but that's kind of how he's looked at modern race. Well, Perun is the Slavic name for Jupiter. They're a thunder god. And then you have Peru. Well, the Finnish were calling themselves early on, the highest family in Finland was calling themselves the Piruet. And they link that to the origin of the word pyramid and pyro, just fire in general, goes back to Phoenician or Finnish or Phoenix, fiery, pirouette, pyri. So the pirouette is where they got the rus too, meaning red or fiery, rosy. So the periodic, gotcha. And then you also have odic, ode, Odin, right? Audio, oddities, an ode to this, to ode. If you have an ode to something, it means you're a writing in honor of something else, an ode. So odic, you have the Eddas, right? There's another way to say that. Edin's Day, Wednesday. That's Odin's Day. So.
Right. One of the things I noticed about helium as well is that the atomic weight is 4, right? And so that's interesting to me because the 4th card of the major arcana is the Emperor card. And actually, there was a switch that happened with the Hebrew letters that Crowley, he was well known for switching 2 main things. And I know we talked about it briefly one time, but he switched a couple of cards, and then he also switched the Hebrew letter correspondence with 2 cards. He switched the correspondence with the Emperor card and the Star card. And for a while, the Emperor was actually associated with Hay. And then he switched it over and said that it actually corresponds better with the Star card. So number 4, the Emperor, corresponding back in the day with Hay, and then it's also he, right? And so the Emperor being a paternal sort of figure, right? And so I think that's kind of a curious sort of thing. So just thought I would point that out for what it's worth.
Chill out, man. Let's go through here. Lithium, okay? Lithia, you have your goddess Lydia. There is a Lithia goddess, but she's not as prominent. But here, let me pull this up. The goddess Lydia. Okay, well, Lydia was an Iron Age kingdom of Western Asia Minor, located generally east of Ionia in the modern Western Turkish provinces of Usak, Manisa, and inland Izmir. Izmir is Smyrna, by the way. Ancient Smyrna, ancient Greece, is modern day Izmir, Turkey, Izmir. So you have New Smyrna, Florida. Shout out my Greek equals Creek video. New Smyrna, Florida is New Izmir, Turkey, you could say. But I'm trying to find out.
That's the other thing too, man. Just, the greater understanding you have over what these elements actually do, I can't even imagine all of the things that come up with mythology and numerology and everything else. So that's where I feel like I'm personally really lacking, if I'm being honest, is a lot of these elements I've heard about forever, but I can't exactly say I know what they do. And it's interesting because you start off with something like hydrogen, and then you go all the way down to like the pit below, and you have all of the Californicum or whatever, Americanium, Berkelium, and Einsteinium, and everything else. It's really interesting that it really becomes like kind of messy when you go down below, and it's not as simple or anything else. Yet it's the exact same table, and there's things like iron and gold and silver and everything else, and then you have elements that I'm sure most people who are even watching this have never heard of.
Right. I was trying to look up some Lithia etymology, but coming back empty-handed. But I'll just have to go with lith means stone, generally. Monolithic, right? If something's megalithic, monolithic. I also see a good comment. Lilith.
That I was just thinking that.
All things having to do with Lilith. And
right.
Lilith is a female figure in Mesopotamian and Judaic mythology, theorized to be the first wife of Adam. So isn't that interesting that we have her up at the top near these two, primordial figures, or hydrogen, helium, kind of these two origins. And you could say that she's kind of in the capacity of a wife up there underneath hydrogen.
So just
sorry.
The way I personally look at it, hydrogen, if it is the High Dragon, and I know this is more my thing, I guess, the Draco sort of connection, right, around the pole star and whatever. I definitely think that Draco, as a northern dragon, I would have to assume that a lot of people, and I might just need to do more research or whatever, but what's coming to me is a feminine sort of dragon. Perhaps both, I don't know, androgynous that way or whatever. But again, it relating potentially to the electron, the feminine, the passive. And I just know that there's a lot of mythology about the northern sky that has to do with this great primordial goddess, sometimes referred to as a dark mother. And so I think hydrogen might be that, or the High Dragon Draco might represent that. And so even when you see like the serpent, right, around the world tree, isn't it mostly connected to Eve, right? The serpent. And so, so the High Dragon, Draco, and then Lilith right down below. That is an interesting sort of thing there.
For sure.
An interesting pairing.
Lithium. You also have Thea in there. Theo, like belief system, or Theo, God, Theo. A little bit of a stretch, but then beryllium. Now, beryllium, I don't have much to say. Don't know much. Need to learn more. But I would say you barren, to bear children, right? If Lilith or Eve are going to be in the conversation, their kind of role was to bear Adam children. So you're either barren or you have the ability to bear children. So beryllium, you also have, I don't want to stretch it too far. I don't have much else to say with that. But
well, I'm hearing bear as well, right? Beryllium. So.
Yes. Barrier, barometer, good comments.
Nice.
Bartender.
And then actually just the fact that it's B as well, right? Kind of interesting.
Boron. Okay. Meaning boring. Something's boring. Or if you're boring a hole, well, guess what? Those are both ruled by Virgo. That's why if you're a gopher, gopher, okay? Virgo's all about service, but they're also rule the surface. So underneath the surface, in service to others. Boring and boring. Virgo, ergonomic, but they're also the gopher. So boron, I don't know how much it relates to Virgo, but the boar root to me goes back to Virgo. It does also go back to Venus a little bit, because Venus, or Freya, is associated with the boar, pulled on a chariot of either cats or boars, Freya, that is.
Well, it's interesting the fact that it's just the letter B, and you brought up Berkana earlier, right? Which looks like the letter B as well, and it's named Berkana. And so, yeah, breasts, there's lots of words. B, it being very, very feminine, I think, in so many different ways. So, to your point, Virgo, Venus, I can make sense of that.
Mm-hmm. Carbon. Okay.
It's a big one.
Carbon. You have your 666. People say, "Ooh, 666, the beast, the all these things," and there's truth to that. And yeah, it's a number to be respected, if not feared. But it really rules material life, existence, reality. It's the sign of, what do they say? Carbon's the most abundant element in the universe, or at least that we know of around us in this material world, for sure. But
interesting.
Carbon represents matter itself being the most prominent, element. And carbon also is what you get your coal from. Saturn rules cold, cool temperatures. Yeah. What else? What do you want to say on carbon?
Do you see anything that might relate it? I'm curious, maybe the chat knows something, but car being right there, right? The first three letters of carbon, So when I think of the car, I think of kind of like chariot symbolism and travel and things like that. So I'm just wondering if there's something in the nature of carbon that relates it to that. Probably.
Well, why is this the element that they chose to control us with? Because Saturn rules control. So they're not taking nitrogen, which is, perhaps some would say might be as important as oxygen as it is in terms of life and everything. And why aren't they taking nitrogen or these other elements and weaponizing them? Because carbon's that 6. It's got that Saturnian fingerprint to it. So yes, we're all in our cars, our automobiles, and this is your car ban. They're going to ban the cars, right?
Nice. Yeah.
Put a bond, your bonds, your loans, your debt. So carbon's all about Saturn. And well, yeah, we could take this farther. It probably goes back to Capricorn, because Capricorn's the carpenter, rules the car rear, right? So yeah, very Saturnian, carbon 666.
Right. Interesting. So even, the Saturnian connection with the cube, right? And the fact that the cube has 6 sides to it, and the cube can be made up of 2 triangles, like the Jewish star, right? And then each star in and of itself, each triangle in and of itself, right? The angles of a perfect triangle are 60 degrees in each corner. So 666 is baked into every single triangle, basically, as well. A perfect triangle, that is. 60-degree corners.
Sure, yeah, man. So let's okay. So I'm just gonna pull up each one that we're talking about. So
yeah, go for it.
So it's moving a little better. But carbon has 666. You guys see this? Nitrogen, okay. Perhaps the good luck molecule, nitrogen, okay, with the 777, the jackpot, and the word jackpot. So here, pull up nitrogen. Nitrogen, 14.0077, all about the 7.
Yes. Wow.
So some pretty significant fractals, Kabbalistic fractals going on
Yeah.
in this element.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So let's do nitro. Now, nitro, I can tell you how this might relate to Jupiter. You've got 7 being related to Jupiter. Nitro. So you have nitro, of course, being associated with kind of burning, fire. It's not as fiery as pyro, but nitro definitely have a association with energy, warmth. Your nitrous. Who's seen Fast and Furious guy? What do they call him? Dominic Toretto. Is that the protagonist of Fast and Furious? Throw on the nitrous, and right. So that's, I don't know what type of nitrogen that is, how many molecules or whatever it's bonded to, or who knows what. But nitrous, you could say, has a association with well, I don't know, but you've got the word tro in there, which is what I definitely wanted to touch on. Tro, which is true. It's also throwing. So this is Sagittarius, like trajectories, tro, true, travel, right? So very Sagittarian with the TR. That's also your Thor, Tor, Tro, Tor. Those are kind of interchangeable, but nitrogen, yeah.
Right. So what I see is night, right? And so the N, to me, symbolic of night, symbolic of nuit or newt, and nuit being night, right, in French. And so nitrogen, and then the number 7, I heavily correspond to the northern sky. 7 stars of Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. In fact, I think that the number 7, the glyph for the number 7, I think comes from the Big Dipper. And so the 7 is one arm of the 4 that makes up the swastika, right? And we've talked about the fact that Florida looks like a number 7 as well, which I think is super amazing for a lot of different reasons. So nitrogen, knew it's night sky. That's kind of what I pick up a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. That went over my head. The night, of course, night. Knit. Also, if you're knitting things, you're stitching them together. You might be blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
night Trojan. The good comment. Agenda Tony 1. Thank you. Trojan. Very good.
Trojan. Nice.
Yeah.
That's
Night
cool.
Trojan. Love that. So what's next? We've got oxygen. Okay. I got a little more to say on this one. Oxygen. Oxygen, if I'll pull this up. Oxygen. Should I misspell that? 15.99. You could almost round that up to 16 and get your 8 and your 16. But 15.99999. And ox, well, that should be obvious. It's the cow, the bull, the bovine creature, the ox, the yak. And ox and yak are the same root, by the way. Yak, yak, ox. So yak is the ox. And this rules density. Okay? Density in the body. You don't want things to oxygenate in the body, right? Could be interpreted as the death particle. And the oxygen goes back to the bowl and matter, because the bowl also rules matter. we were saying that carbon rules kind of, I'd say carbon is the element of reality and material existence, whereas oxygen is the element of matter, the mother, the mud, the mutter, the moo, and the utter, the utter existence, blah, blah, blah. So that's oxygen, because oxygen is kind of is a rather heavy compared to the ones that came before it, but it rules, you could say, it's the opposite of hydrogen. And if we're looking at the numbers, it's the octave of hydrogen. So hydrogen being 1, oxygen being 8, they're kind of at odds. They're harmonizing in the sense that it's repeating, but what they represent are kind of at odds. Oxygen is I'm hesitant to use the word death, but the death of things, oxygen tends to represent death inside the body, whereas a lot of us are told that it's the life particle. This is, you need oxygen to the brain. And well, that's not actually maybe the case. We were talking about that with the hydrogen guy like a week ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was going to bring up the ox connection as well. And just even the O, right? The fact that it's the element that corresponds with the O, and the ox to being an animal that you castrate. That's why they were called oxen, is because they're castrated bulls. And so they're more easily domesticated. And so the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph, which means ox, which corresponds with the Fool card. And so that makes a lot of sense. Actually, the major arcana in general, from like a Kabbalistic Hebrew perspective, it begins with the bull and ends with the bull. It begins with Aleph and the Fool, and it ends with Tau, as in Tau cross or Taurus, right?
Yeah.
Ta, yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting that bull symbolism kind of bookends the major arcana in certain ways, I would say, the beginning and the end, right? And then there's the idea of the bull of heaven, right? Oxymoron.
So oxymoron, that's a dig at Taurus, very Tauresian word, because they are the ox. And if any one sign of the zodiac rules morons, it's going to be Taurus. Sorry, guys. You're the most charming sign in the zodiac, and the most down to earth, and
right.
Well, materialistic too. But oxymoron, that's a good one. How can we substantiate this? Maroon. Taurus rules the color maroon as well, or ox blood, close, right?
Ooh.
Crimson, close to there. But
right. So ox, the O, also when you look at the circle, it's symbolic of the entire cosmos, the cosmic womb, if you will. And so the bowl of heaven, right, is definitely a thing. And Sag is the most cowardly, so that's okay.
I disagree, but
right. And so to me, linking the ox to the circle is incredibly appropriate. And I just have to say that one of the jobs for these oxen was to pull the plow, right? And Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, they've been called many times the plow. And in fact, I know definitely in Ireland, they have a flag called the Starry Plow. And it's a plow in front of the Irish flag colors, the traditional colors, I believe. And there's 7 stars within the plow because it's symbolic of Ursa Major. There you go. Oh, so it's just green. But you got it. The Starry Plow. Right. So there's a tradition of the ox or the bull or the cow being associated with the northern sky in multiple ways. One of the ways is that it pulls the plow, right? And so my buddy L.C. King, he likes to talk about the threshing floor and how the cow, depending on what you're doing and what you're milling, it's attached to a central point of pivot, basically, which is like symbolic of the North Star, essentially. And so mill symbolism, threshing floor symbolism relates to the North, but there is this idea of a cow going around the North Star. And in fact, Ursa Major, too, it's been referred to as the 7 oxen as well, which I think is interesting. So, again, the circular sort of thing, and again, the circular nature of the O is why I bring it up.
Chilling, man. Didn't the bull or ox come out of Odinma? Yes. The Brahmin cow came out of Odinma. So the Brahmin is also your Aldebaran.
Yeah.
Aldebaran. Like that almost kind of relates to Aleph, to Alda, the alphabet.
Totally. Oh, yeah. And it's amazing to me that a lot of symbolism attached to the northern sky, pretty much the exact same thing has been said about the Pleiades, which is in Taurus as well. And so that's a whole conversation. It's a whole rabbit hole. But the 7 sisters.
So, Aurine. Trying to find out what that
Right.
doesn't matter. But
I've noticed that too.
so, okay, fluorine. Trying to pull up here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought you were saying taurine. I thought it was more cow stuff. But fluorine,
No, but
right?
that's, fluorine. So, fluorine. Okay. You have your flow, fluorescence. So, flu would indicate a connection to Saturn because you have your flus, right? Like your sickness, your virus. You also have fluid, which is why you have a flu, because there's fluid in the lungs or something like that. And you also have fluor. So fluor could represent Pisces, which also rules sickness. And fluorine or fluorite, I associate with Pisces a little bit. Flow, Pisces rules flows and floors because your feet go on the floor. Pisces rules the feet. So fluorescence is light or glowing. Something's fluorescent, right? So that's why when we were talking about the fleur de lis, it's kind of redundant saying fleur de lis, flower of light. It's kind of like saying light of light, fleur de lis. So fluo, and I was trying to link Aurine to why am I trying to link that to pigs?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
Good question.
sorry. Yeah, I'm not posing that to you, but if anyone knows what root word I'm looking for, is it Orsini means bear. Ori. If anyone knows what I'm trying to get at, please help me. But it's not Orsini, which I know means bear. But
Right. Okay. So as you're talking, you mentioned light, right? And how this corresponds with light. And I'm just noticing, right? It's number 9. Number 9 is the 9th card, right? Of the major arcana. It's the Hermit card. And so the Hermit card is well known for holding a lantern or a lamp. And the Hebrew letter that corresponds with that card is Yod or Yud, which is like a spark, basically. So it's the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And they say that it's kind of like, it's almost like a period or something. It's like the first simple mark that kind of gives all of the other marks some sort of expression or whatever. It's like drawing the first little thing in the alphabet that created all the other letters. So there's a light correspondence with number 9. And I don't know if this is like extremely appropriate or not, but the Hermit card too, it's about finding your inner light, right? And so the number 9 has a lot to do with going back to itself. So I don't know if we've talked about it, but are you aware of the mathematics of 9 and how it returns to self?
No.
So 9 plus 9 is 18. 1 plus 8 is 9. You add another 9, it's 27. 2 plus 7 is 9. So all the way up and down the line, half of 9 is 4.5. 4 plus 5 is 9. Half of that is 2.25. So you get the idea. So 9 always returns back to itself, right? And so I just think of the nature of light too, perhaps returning back to itself, or finding your inner light, kind of like what the Hermit card's all about. What's up, the Branch? He's a homie too. Gotcha.
Oh, nice. Good.
There you go.
Well, moving on.
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got neon. Neon. So, neon to me, I see associated with Uranus, okay, and Prometheus, and there's different savior archetypes, but then there's not innovator, but there's figures who bestow technology to mankind. And neon to me kind of represents this I don't know, whoever this god is, whether it's Prometheus, Uranus, the tech one, the one who's ruling this age that we're stepping into. And one of the biggest signatures, fingerprints of that age is the neon sign, right? If you took a villager from, all timeline manipulation aside, if you took a peasant from like 2,000 years ago and plopped them in modern today, I think a car would freak them out less than a neon sign. I think a neon sign would be up there, or like a flat screen TV, of course, would be up there with the most perplexing devices that you could show someone who's not accustomed to them. Neon would be up there. Also, I was talking with Seth Balin a couple days ago, and we both play music or play guitar, and neon can produce some pretty extreme. Neon produces the most drastic audio interference, like distortion or hum frequency coming through. So if you're close to a neon sign, it can make live performances almost undoable if you're using certain instruments. So neon. And then good comment right here. Thank you. You've got the new eon. Fucking love that. Wow. The new eon that we're stepping into, neon. Totally. So that's Uranus, Janus. Also, Janus is where you get eon, and ion. Because J turns into an I. It also goes soft. Janus, Eonus, Eona, ion. Okay. So that's Uranus. Uranus, people place Prometheus with a couple different gods, but to me, he really harmonizes best with Uranus. Prometheus, Uranus. You could also see him as Lucifer, but Lucifer just kind of gave fire, or a spark, or music, he gave music to mankind. Prometheus gave fire, the technology. But I see Uranus as this technological benefactor of mankind. And Aurine, I also see Urine. I know we're going back, but we were on fluorine, which I also associate with Aquarius a lot of times because you have airflow, not only water flow.
Ah,
But
interesting.
so let me pull up neon. This is neon, so everyone knows.
Right.
Neon gas fills these tubes, lights up like that. And Neo is the savior in the Matrix. Neo,
Right.
who is what? He's like the Jesus figure of a computer program simulation. Very Uranian dynamic going on. So,
Right. Yeah. I see that as well. Very interesting. Neo. Yeah. I mean, so I think you were saying this the other day, Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury.
yeah.
Right. And so the mercurial symbolism with Neo is really interesting too. At the very end of the first Matrix, he gets into a phone booth at a intersection, which is the Crossroads, right? And so Mercury relates to the Crossroads in so many different ways. And then he makes like the final phone call or whatever, and then he just takes off out of there. And so the Crossroads very much is like arguably it's a point of ascension, in a lot of ways. And so the cross being related to the number 4, but whenever you're dealing with the number 4, and if you're dealing with a cross or like a square, there's always the middle point, which represents the 5th thing, which is the thing that kind of represents transcendence. So that's one of the things I've kind of been geeking out lately, is how basic shapes like the square and its relationship with the number 4 actually has a very strong relationship to the number 5 by the nature of the fact that it has a sacred center. And so the fact that Neo kind of transitions and then takes off, at the crossroads, at the intersection, and there's so much green too in that movie, and that definitely relates to Mercury, I would say. So I see a lot of hero figures as being very mercurial in nature, and probably by extension, uranium, or how would you say it?
Uranus, yeah. Uranian. Uranian.
Uranian
for sure.
in nature, yeah.
Well, good comment right here. Really good comment. Why is neuter spelled the way it is? Neu. 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 Because this goes back to the octave of Mercury, the hermaphrodite. What are the two signs of the zodiac that rule androgyny? Or at least the two figures, Mercury, right? And then by extension of Uranus, Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign that rules gender neutrality. Mercury is the planet that rules hermaphroditism. I don't know.
Yeah, I got you.
But hermaphrodicity, whatever. Hermaphrodites, Hermes. And then I forget the etymology behind androgyny, but there's ogeny, but we were discussing that root earlier. But Neo, neutered, Aquarius rules the what do they call them? Eunuch. So Uranus, Aquarius, you could say, rules the universe too. Eunuch, uni. Yeah. Goes back to Iana too. Janus. Shout out to Ben from The Archivist. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Two-faced Janus. But yeah, even Neo. Just the fact that he flies for the first time at the very end, and so I just think of Mercury and his winged feet, being the messenger of the gods, flying around and whatever. I think he kind of completed some sort of transmutation, which a lot of movies are basically that anyway. But I think that the symbolism in the first one, man, is really potent. I don't know about the other ones though. Unify.
Right. Yeah, unify. That's Aquarius, bringing things together. humanitarianism.
Right.
Okay, so neon. We'll stop it at 12. We'll do sodium and magnesium, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Sodium. Okay, you have sod, which corresponds to dirt, mud, right? Clay, grass. If someone sods or their pants, not to be crude, but sod is kind of a lesser. Here, we'll look it up. Sodium. Now there's a correspondence to the sun here because sol, soul, and yeah. So dium, but you have dia. You have dia. This is God, right? Dios. So sodium, very much a solar element. But what do you got to say about it?
Right. So this is an example. Did you already say it where the Na comes from?
No, natrium.
Natrium. Okay. Gotcha. Right. So obviously that's something just to keep in mind with everything. Sodium, right? Salt, thinking about the philosophical elements, which I actually have right here. So I've got a little vial of salt right here. I've got a little thing of mercury right here as well. And then I have to have a little bit of sulfur around as well. So I don't know. It's actually interesting because there was some synchronicities with me obtaining all of these. And so they were all given to me, right? Which I think is kind of cool. But as far as the name sodium, I can't say I have too much to riff on, to be honest, with that one.
Right, agreed. Why did they change the name? That might have to be, that would be a good topic, is all the ones whose modern names don't link up their modern symbols or their modern, abbreviated names like this one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Totally. There's well, obviously we'll get to the next one or whatever, but before we bounce, there is a section of the periodic table I'd like to highlight and just see what your thoughts are. It's just a really close proximity of a few huge elements, but we can get to the next one though. Magnesium.
For sure. Magnesium.
I mean, I immediately think of magnetism. I think of magic. I think of Mercury, actually. I don't know if it has a relationship to Mercury at all, but definitely feels like it kind of fits for a few different reasons. The fact that it's the 12th one is really interesting. I tend to associate the number 12 with being a very solar number, the 12 signs of the zodiac, 24-hour day sort of thing. So to me, it's symbolically, what I've heard is that in the solar tradition, the world tree has 12 branches. Under the polar tradition, it had 7 branches. And I've actually seen illustrations with both. You could even see, maybe we talked about it at one point, but the hanged man sometimes will be hung from 2 posts that are trees. And you could tell that each post has 6 branches that were cut off. So it's relating to this solar number. And the hanged man is the 12th card, of the major arcana. So the number 12 is really significant and important.
Right, number 12, magnesium. You also have the magnum opus, right? The great work of the astrologer. But sodium, so dumb. Right. And also Odie. So shout out Lando. I missed those. Sodium. And then Odie, like Odin. So good one there. Magnesium. Guys, make sure to go get some magnesium in your diet. But whatever. No, don't. But Magna. You also have Ness, which is an Irish, right? Ness is like in a Irish queen, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you could say goddess, but queen. And yeah, Ness, Ness. I don't know. I'm sure
MAGA.
they'll MAGA. Fuck yeah, man. Agnes. But yeah, what else do you see?
You know, I think I might be spent on this one too, to be honest.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
yeah, I feel like I really spent most of my time kind of doing the broad overview sort of thing, and I didn't get into the weeds with a lot of these elements. But I know there's stuff there, obviously. So I'm sure the comments, I'm kind of checking in here and there, but I'm sure people have dropped some absolute gems here.
True. All right. Well, what was the last thing you said you wanted to show?
Just check it out, dude. Go to gold. Go to gold on the periodic table.
Yeah, the element or the whole table? Do you want to see?
Go to the whole table.
Okay.
Just because I feel like it's like a golden triangle or something, where I'm just like, whoa, what are the odds that all of these guys are right here nested next to each other? And it's AU, right? So right underneath AG. So you have this really potent triangle with platinum, which I said, according to my buddy Ben, could potentially relate to the pole star. And then you have gold, which relates to the sun. And next to that, you have Mercury, which obviously relates to Mercury. And then above gold, you have silver, which corresponds to the moon. And so to me, just the fact that there's this little triangle there with all of these things, including platinum on the left-hand side of gold, is pretty intriguing to me. And so I'm guessing, almost like with the zodiac, right? You want to understand the symbols or the signs that are right next to each other and the polarity of each sign and stuff like that. It's like what can be gleaned from studying the relationship between the elements and what they sit next to, what their neighbor is, above or below or to the sides or whatever. So when I came across that little section, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Because there's a ton to riff on with all those guys right there, I would say.
Chill out, man. Well, all right, dude.
Cool, dude. Well, this is fun. Thanks for the invite once again.
For sure. Elementals, last thing I'd want to say is element, right? Mental, mind.
Yeah.
Elohim. Okay. Li, lay. Meant. Period. We already went through periodic. I just didn't get to element. It was really it. Elohim, mental. That's it. Some schizophrenic thoughts.
No worries, man. You're all good. I don't remember your period thing.
Mind of God. That's a good one. Element. Mind of God. Meant. Elohim. Meant. Yeah.
And then a period being like a cycle of time, right? So I think that's why obviously a woman gets her period, right? It's a cycle of time. So that all makes sense. But yeah, man, this was a good time. Thanks for prompting this. And I'm still going to continue digging into this electron business and atomic stuff. So that's kind of where I'm going to head next.
For sure, man. We'll make it happen soon again.
Cool. Sounds like a plan, man.
For sure. Well, y'all, here, let me pull up here. Pull up. Boom, symbolic studies.
There you go.
Go hit him up, y'all. Give him a sub, follow, whatever. His Instagram, too. It's just symbolic studies. Instagram as well.
Symbolic.studies.
Symbolic.studies.
Yeah. And I always tell people, you can just go to symbolicstudies.com to find all of my links and all the fun stuff.
Boom. Hit him up. Get a reading.
There you go. Cool, man. Well, until next time, You have a good rest of your evening, and I'll be keeping tabs on what you're up to.
For sure.
All right, guys. Take care.
Everyone have a good night.